Okay, so hi again, everyone. Thanks for being here. This is our fourth edition of our Blue Justice webinar, which we've initiated earlier this year with the support of the Amur Joint Research Unit and my colleague Betty Kefelec, who can't be with us today, and myself, as well as our colleagues from the University of Kiel, Konrad, Sylvia Klepp, and Marie-Christine Riekhoff. And we've also got the support from the GDR Omer at the national level in France to do with our working group on the blue economy to run this webinar series. And today we're really fortunate to host a presentation by Konrad Ott. Konrad is a professor of philosophy and environmental ethics at the University of Kiel in Germany, and Konrad's actually been involved in some work I've become aware of through interacting with an organization which is called Kiel Marine Science, which brings together many disciplines from the marine sciences, and I found it very interesting and actually I think quite unusual to have people like Konrad working as philosophers and environmental ethics specialists involved directly in these multidisciplinary marine science endeavors. And so I'm really thrilled to hear you, Konrad, tell us all about a philosopher's perspective on what we mean or what we could mean by ocean justice. We'll go for well, your presentation, then we'll have some time for questions and discussions after the presentation. So thanks again, Konrad, for joining us today, and the floor is yours.
Thank you, Oliver, for the kind introduction. Yes, indeed, the involvement in Kiel Marine Science and the idea of a future ocean sustainability program was one main reason why I changed university. 11 years ago, I moved from Greifswald, which is a far remote Pomeranian university, to Kiel, and I never regret this change because Kiel Marine Science is, beside other things, a really great enterprise. My lecture is entitled Ethics of Ocean Justice. The title indicates that ethics is a reflective discipline. It reflects at a higher order claims and demands for justice, and it tries to analyze and reconstruct claims for justice. But of course, sometimes some ethicists want to defend claims of justice they make on their own. And I will do in the final part of my lecture. In former times, the ocean was seen as an unregulated space. Carl Schmitt im Nomos der Erde referred to this mare librium tradition. Today, it is rather seen as some kind of a common heritage of humankind. And in a recent article, me and Colin von Negenborn and Nele Matslök have tried to see how the ocean can be regarded as a moral and as a legal entity. And from these considerations, a programmatic idea evolved: ocean justice, a largely unexplored field. But if it is a moral and legal entity and a common heritage of humankind, then it must be open to justice topics. In Kiel Marine Science, we integrate three disciplines: law, what is just from a legal point of view; ethics, the philosophical disciplines; And geography, Celia Klatt is the colleague I work together with. And from geography, many case studies of hydrosocial territory and conflicts come in, where Western people and non-Western people, some say indigenous people, interact in these conflicts. And as a paradigm example, I like the book of Louise Takeda, Island Spirit Rising, the case of the forests of Haida Gwaii. This is critical geography at its best. And ethics is about institutions, principles, and reflections. In philosophy, we draw a distinction between ethics, which is more conceptual, discursive, and reflective, and morals, which has to do with moral emotions, moral intuitions, customs, and convictions. And now, of course, Western academic ethics, and I'm an old white man who is clearly within the Western tradition, but of course, in a post-colonial situation, whatever post means in details, we must meet at a par with the many moral, religious, political, even cosmological doctrines in the West and in non-Western parts of the world. So Western academic ethics has no privilege to justice in such a situation. She might be helpful, but ethics should be deprivileged. And these three disciplines can be arranged as a triangle. We have law, spatiality or geography, and ethics. And then you can bridge the lines between those disciplines. Spatiality to ethics is about the case studies, empirical data, and the implicit claims for justice. The line between law and ethics may be filled by the distinction between what does the law say, de lege lata, and how might the law improve, de lege ferenda. And the line between geography, spatiality, and law can be bridged by topics as governance systems in specific parts of the world, regulation, law of the high sea, other system of rules and schemes of governance. So ocean justice sozusagen moves in between and on the lines of the triangle. I will, in this lecture, as I agreed with Oliver, mainly remain on the ethical side. I will not say anything about the law or about geography, but the general idea is about how can we operationalize the triangle for research and teaching ocean justice. From an ethical angle, the social world of normative orders and institutions is never just or unjust per se, but only so in relation to second-order yardsticks, principles, criteria. And of course, one can make social orders on different scales, regional, national, continental, look more just or unjust if you modify your second order yardsticks. So there is a essential yardstick dependency of justice. And I would say that a crucial concept of the justice theories is a concept of entitlements. Who is entitled or is not entitled to what resource, access, opportunity, for what reason? So entitlements, I would say, and Christian Barth from Kiel has the same conceptual idea. Entitlements are a highly important concept. I took some looks upon definitions which are found in recent literature. Let's take a look to Bennett et al., a very, very nice study about blue growth and blue justice. And they define justice as follows, quote, "For the purpose of the review, we define social injustices as the unequal distribution of benefits and or burdens, as well as unfair decision-making and governance processes." Such a definition is unacceptable for a philosopher because the first part makes many beneficial projects unfair by a very egalitarian definition. And the second part is tautological. It is injustice if it is unfair. And unfair and injustice are synonyms. And the result from the first part, even if all agents are better off, a project P counts as unfair. If gains of a project are distributed as follows, the party A gets 50%, party B 30%, and C 20%, but all profit, it is still unfair by definition. Even projects that distribute benefits burden uneven in favor of poor people would count as unfair by definition. And I think this is not in the intuition of Bennett and at all. So I would not adopt such a definition. Then there is a definition by Patricia Weidener, and she says, "Is the sea a natural public sphere open to all and protected by all for all species? Or is it a private pocket controlled or contained for the economic interests of or pleasures of a few?" You see, 3 times all, for all, to all. And then Patricia Weidener proposes to understand all maritime conflicts as located along a continuum of the 2 polarized ends. The concept is clear. I have 2 polarized ends. One is good and one is evil. And then I have to say, where do I place a project in between some kind of ecocentric utopia, all species, all marine species, versus, I would say, economic liberalism. I would not conceive justice in such a polarized way. As I said, I'm deeply entrenched in the legacy of the Western axial age. And we have justice in our Western tradition. Think of Plato, the utopia or dystopia of a perfect state. More important is Aristotle, who distinguished general political and particular distributive and so-called commutative justice. Commutative means interactions which are either voluntary, then it's about fair contracts, or are involuntary, then we are in the field of crime and fair punishment, and may ask what a fair penalty might be. But also in the Hebrew Bible, in the Psalter, peace and justice are kissing each other. No peace without justice, and no justice without peace. I think we may remind it in the days we experience right now. In the Evangelion, it is said that the ones being hungry and thirsty for justice are makarioi. That means they are being blessed. And hunger and thirst are very strong embodied emotions. And the Evangelion said that people can long for justice as strongly as they can long for food and fresh water. So there is a very deep human longing for a just world. And in the later Christian doctrine, it is said that all humans are equal before God on the day of the final judgment. This gives equal moral worth or equal moral consideration of all humans, independently of mundane rankings, mundane merits. So I would say the Christian tradition includes such a basic equal worth for all human beings. And I will remain in the more modern Western framework because I have no real expertise in non-Western, say Chinese, say Vedic, say Arabic, Muslim, or African Ubuntu concepts of justice. So I stay in my framework, and I would say one can still learn a lot of John Rawls. The idea to conceive an original position, and the original position is a wheel of ignorance. You do not know your personality, your individuality, and in such a highly artificial situation, you shall adopt 4 principles of justice: a principle of freedom, liberty, a principle of fair equality of chances in society, a principle of a safe minimum in life, and sometimes overlooked, the 4th principle of fairness between generations, fair legacies, fair bequest packages in an ongoing chain of generations. So to me, Rawls gives us some robust yardsticks. And Thomas Pogge tried to globalize Rawlsian principles. He argued, for instance, for a globalized principle of difference, safe minimum. This would mean a kind of a global welfare state. We are far from this. And I see Michael Walz's very great book about spheres of justice as a kind of an amendment, not a contradiction, as an amendment to Rawls, because he said, okay, despite the principles for a basic political order, we need to become sensitive for justice claims in specific cultural spheres: religion, family, work, education, and so on. And in these cultural spheres, we face religious backgrounds as well. And then there were some skeptics, as McIntyre, who said, there is no such thing as an impartial concept of justice. One always has to ask, whose justice? And it was Amartya Sen who said, we do not need a Rawlsian transcendental scheme. We can rely on some common sense. We must ask for human capabilities, and we should go for deliberations. I would say Sen is a very pragmatic concept of justice. And then, of course, there are the skeptics, and the Western tradition includes critique of ideology. This is our Marxian legacy. To Marx, there is no class-neutral justice. And the cry for justice can be a weapon in class struggle. And Foucault and Bob, in his book about rights as weapon, say, okay, of course, justice is a rhetoric word. It can be used in a lot of political conflicts. And just with some irony, I like to remind Friedrich Nietzsche, but this is a German play with words, because Nietzsche said, if the Germans say, das ist aber ungerecht, it sounds always as, it is ungerecht. And gerecht and gerecht in German is just an E and an A, and gerecht had something to do, there is no revenge. So, I would say, justice is situated at the interface between the law, morals, and moral emphasis, and politics. It is quite often a kind of politicized morals. And therefore, some philosophers has argued there can be no such thing as a unified theory of justice. Justice is an essentially contested concept, and it will remain so forever and ever. So there are the optimists, the Rawlsian, Poggian, Walzer, and there are the more or less radical skeptics. Now I bring some distinctions. One important distinction is between idealism and pragmatism. Ideal justice asks what would be an ideal just solution or an ideal world. Of course, we live in a highly non-ideal world, that's clear, but idealism wants to define what would count as an ideally fair solution. It's a little bit John Lennon, Imagine. But the philosopher Joseph Cairns has argued that if we make justice claims, we always invoke a kind of ideal justice. Pragmatism asks how fair is fair enough? Fair enough in a world of scarcity, competition, envy, greed, evil, and so on. And how fair is fair enough in a world in which a lot of drivers of inequality prevail? Talents, natural heterogeneities, personal decisions, families are a source of inequality. Love, fortune, success or failure, character. There are so many drivers of inequality in the fabric of the social world. Following Aristotle, one can ask, how many kinds of justice do we have? The Aristotelian kinds are legal, impartiality before the law, political, procedural, fair participation, good outcomes, distributive justice, according to yardsticks and criteria, compensatory justice, including reconciliation. Just think about the loss and damage debate in climate justice. Then, of course, interactive, that is Aristotle, voluntary or involuntary. But then, of course, the fourth principle of Rawls, intergenerational justice, which is highly, of course, important for me as an environmental ethicist. It has to do with our ideas, what to sustain, what counts as sustainability, weak or strong sustainability. And there are new kinds as recognitional justice, which has a deep background in Hegel and is proposed by Axel Honneth, Nancy Fraser, among others. And another new kind of justice is epistemological or epistemic justice, different kinds of knowledge being involved. I would stop here and say that's fair enough kinds of justice. And I would see post-colonial gender, environment, climate, animal, and ocean as fields and not as kinds. The problem, of course, is the more kinds of justice one has, the more injustices might emerge. And so you will not have less, but more. And then, of course, just take the case of epistemic injustice, new distinctions come in. So epistemic injustice is distinguished according to testimonial injustice, of course, when prejudice calls a hearer to give a deflated level of credibility to a speaker's word, whenever this might be the case. And hermeneutical injustice occurs when a gap in collective interpretive resources puts someone at an unfair disadvantage, and so on and so on and so on. More specific concepts come in. What counts as a prejudice? What gap is involved? Which disadvantage is unfair? And of course, again, the problem of circular reasoning comes up because it is epistemic injustice if it is unfair. Distinctions without end. Scope. Who is in the community of justice? This is a debate about anthropocentrism, sentientism, maybe all sentient creatures, or maybe even all living beings, maybe even ecosystems, or all what exists. And whatever do you think about scope, then maybe either marine mammals are in your community of justice, or even birds, fish, plankton, coral reef, the ocean floor, and so on. So you must be clear about the scope of justice. The pattern of justice is, there are concepts like sufficitarianism. Everybody should have enough, but what counts as enough of what? Prioritarianism, who comes first? Egalitarianism, equality of what? And then, of course, more distinct. In the problem of equality is, would you for equality, that you say equality is important because it contributes positively to social cohesion or something like this? Or would you give intrinsic value of equality, that equality is valuable for the sake of equality. And then on the right, you have a currency. Patterns can be combined with needs, capabilities, entitlements, rights, welfare, and merits. You see how many claims and demands can be made. And therefore, it is very likely that we will face an overabundance of justice claims and demands in this century of climate change, of migration, of inequality, and so on. And one can make the social order even more unfair by definition and wordings. What count as exploitation, unfair exploitation? What counts as an unfair privilege? What count as, and so on and so on. And in recent time, we face the problem of the so-called creeping concepts. This is about the expansion of conceptual scope. What counts as harm, as harassment, insulting, hate speaks, discrimination, and so on. And I see a tendency in the literature on justice that all these concepts are expanded in scope, and if so, more and more social affairs look as unfair. And of course, it's not just concepts. Much is to be said about narratives and imaginaries, visual presentations of injustice. And the combinations of wordings and imaginaries can be, of course, highly suggestive. It was Alex de Tocqueville in the 19th century who argued the more equal a society becomes in historical comparative terms, our society as compared with a feudal society or with an ancient empire. The more equal a society becomes, the more sensitive its intellectuals become against remaining inequalities. Equalities which have something to do with economy, income, wealth, inheritance, or with the political status of citizenship, giving citizenship to the migrants, for instance. So we are sensitive against inequalities. Me too. And this conceptual analysis of kind, scope, pattern, and currencies of justice, the creeping concept and the Tocqueville paradox can explain, and here ethics explains, on meta-ethical grounds, why claims and demands for more justice have no intrinsic limits. They are, so to say, without end. And now I can identify ethics and the ethics of justice as a third order theory. The first order are the normative orders in a given societies, the law, the customs, the institutions. The second order are the principles which are defined and conceived in the theoretical debates about justice. And the third order is a meta-ethical inquiry how principles and yardsticks are construed, defined, conceived, operationalized, measured, and applied. So the ethicist looks a bit from a distance of what is happening in the many, many debates about justice. And now, what does it mean to this new field of ocean justice and our triangular structure, law, speciality? I would say that an ethical reflected approach to justice is more than just multiplying claims and demands. Claims and demands are made. We have to reflect, analyze, and sometimes also criticize them. And I think we should not take them all for granted. So, but now I go from this third order perspective back to my own second order perspective. But of course, I'm not neutral. I move between the third and the second order, and now I move back to the second order. And then I would say, okay, my own principles or yardsticks are legal fairness, democratic environment policy making. That's quite trivial. I'm in this Rawlsian camp, and I adopt 4 principles: freedom, equality, solidarity, and sustainability. And I would take some steps with Poggi trying to globalize this Rawlsianism. But of course, you might accuse me here and say, okay, you want to globalize a very, very Western theory of justice. I also, Rawls gave principles in his law of people, and and in those days we have to say it clearly, a principle of non-violence, peace in the tradition of Grotius, Thomas Hobbes, Immanuel Kant, Mahatma Gandhi, and John Rawls. Then, of course, as an environmental ethicist, I adopt a safe minimum standard, enough for a decent human life worth of the human being, for all human beings. This is a little bit the debate between Poggi, Nussbaum, and Sen. And then I have 2 more principles. It is unfair to live at the expense of others. Looks quite trivial. And from this principle not to live at the expense of others, a non-victimization principle can be derived. Not living at the expense of others means not victimization of other people in your practice. My other principles are strong sustainability, a refinement of Daly's approach. It includes contraction and convergence in climate ethics, and it includes the conservation, preservation, and restoration of ecosystem services. And in several papers, I try to combine SDG 14, life below water, with strong sustainability. In the Neumann et al. Paper, we interpreted SDG and made a case for strong sustainability. In the Franke et al. Paper, we defined the metaphor of ocean health as productivity resilience, diversity. So we brought the spirit of Elder Leopold to the ocean. And in the Negenborg-Matzluck-Ott paper, we argued for obligations pro tanto with respect to the ocean. Now, I want to show in the last 5 or 6 minutes what it means to analyze one out of many principles. And I take the non-victimization principle as an example. It has clearly an inter- and intra-generational global scope. So the scope of justice is quite clear. How is it grounded? It is grounded in a moral non-harm principle. I would say there should be a moral principle behind a justice principle. And it can be grounded in respect for human rights as well. In economic terms, it refers to non-externalization of costs and burdens. So it has a parallel, a cousin, so to say, in welfare economy. It clearly prohibits things, occupation of territories, eviction and displacement, colonial property rights. So here, I think we can identify clear cases of victimization. This is in line with Amartya Sen, who said, if you have a principle, try to identify the clear cases first, and then move to the more sophisticated and the more contested ones. The constant, and then of course, but if you say I want to base the non-victimization principle on human rights, then you must distinguish between clear-cut violation of rights, impairments of human rights, and compromising, putting human rights at risk. So the negation of a human right has several grades: violation, impairment, and compromising. And I would say the constant natural capital rule of strong sustainability can be based on a non-victimization with reference to future generation and Elder Leopold's principle as well. But operationalizing a non-victimization principle brings more specific concepts in. What counts as structural violence? A Marxist idea. What about polluter pays, beneficiary pays, imposing risks, imposing burdens? All victimization ideas have some causal concept. What is a driver, a trigger, an incentive? What is structural causality? What is a proximate cause and ultimate cause? What means dependency? And is there such a thing as capitalism, which may count as an ultimate cause? I do not believe in an ultimate cause, but it's different matters. And then we face empirical affairs which are always given as stylized facts and stylized narratives. They may be based on some data sets, but in the discourse, we have them mostly as stylized facts and stylized narratives. And then, finally, ethics must reflect and say, where exactly are the fine-grained lines between bad fortune, consequences of voluntary decisions, and victimization of other people. There is a book by Judith Sklar on injustice who addresses a problem at which affairs are said it's bad fortune, it's bad luck, and which are unfair and unjust. It's not always clear. So I can come to an end with a more theoretical part. My approach to justice is more pragmatic. I want to identify severe cases of environmental and ocean injustice. I follow Sen. I have sozusagen roles and principles, but in this respect, I follow Sen. I ask how fair would be fair in us. I have no ideal principles. I want to ask how can sustainable and enduring fairness gains be reached by really lasting reforms. Fairness gains that endure, that are sustainable and are long-lasting. Maybe it's better than have some quick ideals. In terms of sufficiency, we have to make our mind clear how much of some resource is enough for a decent life. I make room for the many sources of inequality which cannot be curtailed so easily. And so Rawls once said, okay, justice is opposed to randomness. Justice wants to redress randomness of life, but Rawls also argued that randomness can never be completely eradicated. If somebody would come, we should eradicate randomness in the name of justice. And I would say that liberty has lexical priority over equality. And I would say there is some Hegelianism in Rawls at this point. And I argue, I argue for this distinction between the third order and the second order. And now we can bring our theoretical aircraft down to Earth and to the ocean, and then can now say, okay, what do we see? And then, of course, okay, you all are familiar with these topics, preserving ecosystem services, but in a fair way. What about overfishing, small-scale artisan fisheries, working condition, fishing fleet, unregulated fisheries, food security, marine food, whaling, pollution? I could say blah, blah, blah. You all know this. Climate change, sea level rise, marine technologies, and all these things. Now you can try, are we now in a position to take our theoretical, conceptual network and try to catch the topics and then bring the catch home? This is the idea of ocean justice. Conceive this network and then try to catch the specific cases. But we cannot ignore a return of harder topics. Today I was in a meeting on nature conservation in Germany, and really hard times for the green topics, because the hard topics gain importance, and they are very deserving attention, resources, and so on. Other topics: military, naval powers, territorial claims on parts of the ocean, as in the Chinese Sea or in the Arctic, debates about what is an island and not just a rock, migration and human smuggling as a business model across the sea and how to address it, marine routes and global trades which can be blocked. We have the problem now in the Black Sea, transport of food for many countries where food security is low. Shall we go for deep sea mining? Then we have piracy and unregulated fisheries. So when we started to conceive our ideas of ocean justice, we were still in these peaceful, green, sustainable periods of time, and now time has changed, and not for better. Come to an end. Humans have crossed the ocean since archaic and ancient times, and in this marvelous song of Sophocles in the Antigone about man, it starts, he goes by ship across the sea. What I have said so far came from a very Western perspective, but of course, in a post-colonial situation, the West is at best one voice among other equal voices, and justice in discourse means that there is no privileged voice anymore in the global village. So now I would like to hear and study and learn from the many cultural outlooks on the ocean as to be found in the non-Western traditions, but perhaps even in some cultures that specify the Western culture as a Mediterranean one, which is a mixture. Think about Prodel. I'm interested, I'm a man from the Baltic Sea, and I'm interested in the culture of the Baltic Sea. But of course, there are many cultures. And with some hopes in dark times, I would quote Wilhelm von Humboldt, who said, "The sea divides, but also unites humankind." Thank you for listening.
Thank you very much, Konrad. That was fantastic and a very comprehensive overview, I feel, of these questions of justice. We can't really applaud. Yeah, we can do it with the virtual, but it doesn't quite feel the same. So it would be nice to be in the same room, but we've got some time for comments or questions, reactions, or feedback from those of us who are still connected. If anyone wants to have a go, I've got a few questions, but I'll hold back and see if anyone wants to jump in. And if you speak up, please, could you just briefly introduce yourself? Nope, no questions for now. Okay, so I mean, you mentioned entitlements, as being one key dimension to consider. And of course, in the ocean, it's probably, I mean, from my economist perspective, it's probably important everywhere, but it seems to me it's even more important in the ocean, which has got this perception, as you highlighted, that it's you know, a common pool, or I mean, it's described in various terms. And I'm just wondering whether on that particular, I mean, where does that discussion on entitlements sit in the, at some point you mentioned it as a currency. But it seems to me that that very question of how do we resolve the question of entitlements in some very applied context is actually a fairly fundamental question. And then I'm wondering what the conceptual frameworks that you describe can help us find as, you know, a way of dealing with that question.
For a philosopher, if I have this concept of an entitlement, I see claims which come from the first person's perspective, that someone claims, I am entitled to.
Yeah.
This means, in some sense, there's a very close relationship between entitlements and rights. I'm entitled to X means I have a claim or I have a right. If I accept this first person statement, then somebody must fulfill the entitlement. There's always what Honora O'Neill has called the dark side of rights. The dark side of rights means someone must be a duty bearer. Somebody has an obligation to respect the entitlement, which sometimes can be done in non-material way. But if the entitlement is a material one, entitled to resources, entitled to access or something like this, then of course a bearer, a duty bearer, has not just to respect the right, he has to fulfill it.
Mm-hmm.
Fulfillment of the rights of others, of course, have some costs for the duty bearers. This is clear in economic terms. So then, of course, any statements of entitlements can be affirmed or can be rejected. I can, if you claim an entitlement, I can say yes or no. To my, I'm a discourse ethicist, and there are no self-evident entitlements. You are always entitled, so to say, to reject such claims. And then discourse starts. And then the currencies come in. I'm entitled because I'm needy. I'm entitled because I have some merits. I'm entitled because of membership, and so on, and so on. And then discourse on justice starts. Matters become even more complex if entitlements are claimed out of a third-person perspective. That I say, those groups are entitled because I, as a philosopher, say so. But of course, then of course I have to argue as well, but it may happen that I say those groups are entitled to X, although those groups do not claim the entitlement at all. Then I make an entitlement claim on behalf of third parties. Maybe they like it, or maybe they never thought about it. So you see, it's always tricky. And I would say entitlement as a discourse concept, they are openness. They give the first steps. They give the first step in a discourse, but quite often they do not give definite answers. The answers have to be found.
And that would be the same if the entitlements are about, entitlement to sit at the table to discuss what should be done.
Who should be entitled to participate? That is a question of procedural justice. That is clearly, then you can say, oh, all affected people, but who is affected?
Yeah.
Can there be representatives who speak on behalf of animals, on behalf of future generation, on behalf of indigenous groups, and so on and so on? Can there be speakers, so advocates, advocatory roles? Should we have them? Of course, I would endorse and accept a kind of an all-affected principle. But of course, if you then move from the ethics to the legal, then the seats are quite often restricted. Okay. You must select who has some competencies and who in the end is responsible for a decision to be made.
No.
In Germany, I have organized 5 times so-called citizen juries. Citizen juries are participatory and deliberative formats which can bring citizens into the political realm. But of course, citizen juries cannot make political decisions. Then we move from the moral to the law and say, no, finally, a collective binding decision must be made by democratic elected authorities, not by some citizens which are brought together in a citizen jury. So participation is fine, but procedural justice in the end must have very clear-cut competences, making people responsible for decisions.
Right. Thanks a lot.
I do not like this dissolution of responsibility among all claimants, all participants. But then, of course, the question is, we do not have such well-established mechanism beyond the national state.
Yeah. Thanks a lot. We have examples in the French context that would illustrate very nicely, I think, what you just described. I mean, there were some comments, but they disappeared from my screen. But did someone have a question? Dale, did you want to jump in?
Yeah, actually, I have a comment and then actually 2 kind of very specific questions, but they're ones I wrestle with. The comment is, if we're dealing with international organizations, then public international law makes clear that the only parties that have what they call international legal personality in standing are either states or, in some instances, what they call cosmopolitan individuals, and that pertains more to things like human rights. So, I mean, if we're dealing, and usually in states, of course, it's, well, I don't know, it's citizens, but there's NGOs. But international organizations, public international law is very clear on this. And so, one of the debates is, do you include non-governmental organizations and so forth? But public international law is very clear on this. But I have 2 questions. One is on, currencies of justice, equality of opportunity versus equality of outcome. It's a real general question. And then I agree with Konrad. I happen to like Sen a great deal. He's very pragmatic. And he makes a point in his book, I think it's Theories of Justice from 2008, he says that Sanskrit has this concept of justice as like NYAYA, which is kind of a combined procedural and distributive justice. So I was just on those two concrete questions. What he thinks about equality of opportunity versus equality of outcome or currencies of justice. And then Sen's concept of justice is Naya, that is sort of you can't really distinguish between procedural and distributive justice.
As far as I understand Sen, he is, as I am, more pragmatic. He wants to identify first the severe, clear-cut cases of injustice. And then, of course, his main focus is on capabilities. He is a supporter of the so-called capability approach in justice. But if you take a closer look on Sen, then you see that the capability approach has at least two problems. One problem is, and then I come to this outcome problem. One problem in the capability approach is that capabilities cannot be observed. They are unobservable directly. What can be observed is being and doings, and the capability must be presupposed, but they are more or less a black box. And then is economist, and then you can see this, the capability approach is like a production function, that there is the input, the resources go in, then in the black box, there's a capability set that convert the inputs, the resources, and then there is the output, the beings and doings. And then, Dale, to come to your question, I see Sen not as a very strong egalitarian. I see him more as a sufficientarian, because all capabilities must have a kind of a threshold. This was Nussbaum's point. And if the threshold is fulfilled, it is fair enough. I think this does not completely answer your question.
Yeah, but that's okay. And just kind of what's your general opinion about the debate between equality of opportunity and equality of outcome?
I'm in favor of equality of opportunity. Equality of outcome, I would say, is not a very convincing idea. But then equality of outcome must neutralize so many factors of inequality. And this was my general point I wish to make, that I say the fabric of the social world produces inequality on a regular base. The famous example of roles were the families. And of course, you are a member of a family, you are born in a family by coincidence, by randomness. And then Rawls argues, parents have a right to educate their children. And even if the outcome would be far more equal if all children would be educated in public schools and would not see their parents very often, you can block this. You can block this source of inequality, but you can block it only at a very high price. And I would not like to pay the many prices we would have to pay if we really wanted to go for equality of outcome. So you can say that, okay, you are a liberal. Yes, I'm a Hegelian in my background. And the highest idea of the modern world is freedom. And Hegel argued that equality makes some sense, but quite often equality is abstract reasoning. In the German language, Gleichheit ist das höchste Prinzip des abstrakten Verstandesgebrauchs. But the highest ethical idea is freedom. And you can see why Rawls, in his history of moral philosophy, is so friendly and sympathetic with Hegel. And Hegel is quite often misunderstood as a philosopher of the Prussian regime or something like this, which is not true. So I would say no, equality of outcome, we should better not try. But of course, there is a kind, I would call it, new egalitarianism. A person in the field is Chris Armstrong, who has written a book on the ocean as well. He is very strong in favor of equality, and Chris Armstrong gives intrinsic value to equality. Equality for the sake of equality. But I think this egalitarian position faces many, many objections, as a leveling down objection or something like this. Okay? So opportunity, equality of outcome is not desirable.
You know, I'm a bureaucrat, all right, a national and international bureaucrat. So for me, you know, I have to take a more kind of focused thing. So stuff like Chris Armstrong, you know, is really kind of it's way outside my scope. I have to say. Yeah. Anyway, what's your definition of? I mean, what do you think are sort of applicable, pragmatic definitions of fairness?
Pardon, I didn't get the point.
Oh, what do you think are? Now, I'm speaking really as somebody that has to work inside organizations. What do you think are applicable definitions of fairness? I mean, I know there's many different definitions, but you know, which ones in your mind are kind of useful or you like the best or whatever?
Maybe I would bring another concept in, which is often confused with equality, and this is equity.
Yeah, go ahead.
Equity has some deep roots in this Roman suum cuique tribuere, which has to do with entitlements as well. And equity is a kind of appropriateness, adequacy. Of course, this is a very fuzzy concept of equity, but in my question, what is fair enough, quite often we have to deal with equity and would say, okay, which would be a fair and an equity solution. In Germany, we have the wording Recht und billig, Angemessenheit oder auch Verhältnismäßigkeit. So I would like to go more in this direction. But Dale, I do not like to give a very general definition of justice. I want to make clear how complex the overall conceptual frame of justice is. And I think this complexity can hardly be captured but by one definition in the form justice is blah, blah, blah. Maybe there are always facets of justice, but the holistic definition maybe would blind us against the many sophistications. But if you believe, then I have the one holistic definition, everything is clear. No, it is not.
No, I agree with you very much. I think Elster and Walzer and Peyton Young and even Sin, they all have different terms, but this idea of local justice, at least if you're dealing with actual policy with institutions, I'm 100% with you.
Yeah, the problem is what is global justice? I would say global justice is only the attempt to make justice claims on is a scale. Global is a scale. Yeah, it is not an ideal. It is the attempt to open a new scale beyond the national state. Yes, but very often it is suggested that now global justice is ideal justice, or global justice is supreme justice, or something like this. And there are so many young scholars now writing articles about global justice, global justice. To me, it's only a scale.
I had just a follow-up. I mean, you did say you were, positioning yourself in one perspective on justice, and that there are many others out there, and that you want to, better look at these alternative views or perceptions. But is this something that people have looked at, that there would be principles that emerge from these different perspectives on fairness or on justice, from these different cultural backgrounds already? I mean, are you aware that some of these principles that have been in the Western conceptions of justice are also features that emerge in other perspectives that you described or listed?
Yes, I would say so. We have now opened a new kind of justice, recognitional justice. So I have to recognize that I am arguing from a very specific tradition. But I recognize the other who comes from a different culture, has a different life world background, maybe different experiences. And he is entitled to make claims of justice as well as I am entitled, wherever he or she comes from. Then, of course, we have the problem that in some cultures, we have quite elaborated cultural tradition, Confucius, for example, Islamic tradition, the Vedic wisdom tradition. And then, of course, we have cultures which have not this elaborated scriptures and doctrines, because many cultures are more oral cultures. They work with narratives. They work with proverbs. A friend of me has analyzed the environmental ethics of the Oromo in Ethiopia. And in the Oromo, the ethics is encapsulated in narratives, in poems, in proverbs, in icons, and so on and so on. And I have supervised a PhD thesis from a female Shola of the Okanagan Silk Nation, First Nation in the US. And in this, we had a problem that in the Okanagan Silk Nation, there are two languages. There is the High Okanagan language, which is only spoken at specific occasions, at ceremonies. And then there is some kind of justice with worldliness, and so on. And there is the ordinary Okanagan, which is spoken in daily life and in intellectual work. So there might be the case that some claims will never reach our Western ears because they are spoken in some very special languages. And it is quite common in oral cultures that you have more than one language. I just mentioned this problem in order to make clear that we Westerners are a culture of scriptures. We must make room for the involvement of oral cultures, maybe from the Pacific, from the small island states, and so on and so on. And this is a task ahead. And we discourse ethicists have arguments. Why not only arguments which are done in a westernized ways count in debates? Maybe a narrative is not a formal argument, but it brings some very important messages. Maybe a song can entail a story about what's fair and what's unfair. So we must open our to all the many ways oral cultures can communicate. I think this is a point in this kind of epistemic or epistemological justice, to open our minds.
Yeah, and the reason why I was asking as well is that question there was asking about equality of opportunity versus equality of outcomes. Just wondering whether people looking at other sources of or perceptions of what's fair would have landed somewhere close to where we've landed in the Western scriptural perspective you're describing. So just thinking that if that was the case, then
it's even more complicated, because there are no such thing as the pure indigenous voices, because there are so many NGOs all around the world, and the NGOs, they mix Western parlance, the whole parlance of sustainability, of post-colonialism, of biodiversity, of equity, and they mix it with indigenous voices. I know the concept indigeneity is very contested as well. But then what we have are not Rousseauian original voices, but mixtures of NGO debates, NGO parlance, and such voices. So we are sozusagen facing hybrid voices all the time.
Yeah, so it's complicated.
And I do not want to make it simple.
Do we have any other comments or questions? We're running to the hour and a half there. Anyone? Nope, I can't see any hands raised and anything in the questions and answers. So with that, then we'll thank you heaps, Konrad, for running us through this very interesting presentation. I think we've got a material for a lot of future discussions and further investigations. We'll have a whole series of upcoming webinars, some with different disciplinary perspectives as well. They're on the website of the webinar if you want to look them up. There's around one a month for the coming 4 or 5 months on a whole range of topics. So join us again for the next sessions, and we can continue those discussions in the context of these other presentations that we will have as well. So thanks again,
just
Konrad.
one word. I think this route, ocean justice, this is a very promising route for research on ocean social science research in years to come, but we have taken the very first steps. The very first steps, and maybe we can see what lies ahead of us if we really want to go down this route. But it's a very promising route. So sorry.
I fully agree. Thanks again. Thank you, and thanks everyone. And have a nice end of your morning or evening or afternoon. See you soon.
Okay. Bye.
And I'll be in touch.
We stay in touch. We stay in touch, of course.
See you soon.
Bye. Bye.
Cheers.